Hi, this is Johanna Sawyer Clausen, and this is my presentation for week 6 for Technology Tools for Teachers. So this week I'm going to do a brief video on the Aztec civilization. And you can see here in this picture, this is a rendering of the capital city of the Aztecs called Tenochtitlan. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But you can see here that they were very technologically advanced. Besides being great farmers and hunters and warriors, they were also great builders. So you can see these huge stone and wood buildings. You've got this temple here, which is where their emperor, their ruler, would have stayed, and then various other locales, temples. Of course, the city of Tenochtitlan was on an island, so it was surrounded by water. So they were very advanced. So the Aztec civilization, it developed centuries after the Mayans in central Mexico. So the story goes that around 1325 CE, a group of hunters were wandering around central Mexico searching for a permanent home. And they came across this island. And on this island, they saw an eagle sitting on a cactus with a snake in its beak. So the Aztecs took this sign as a sign that that island should be the location of their capital city. So they built the capital city of Tenochtitlan there on that island. And that's an island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. So Tenochtitlan is actually now modern day Mexico City. So the construction of the city is so great that they were actually able to continue and add on to that even after the Aztec Empire was ultimately conquered several hundred years after its development. So at its height, the city of Tenochtitlan was actually the largest in the Americas, and it was one of the largest in the world, rivaling even those of other cities in Europe that had been around for several thousands of years. So they were very advanced, not only agriculturally, as I said, and as hunters, but also in creating civilizations just like those peoples that were in Europe. It was a center of trade. Tenochtitlan was. People from all over the areas would come to trade goods and services with the people there. And at one point, it was estimated that 2 million people lived on the island of Tenochtitlan and in the surrounding areas. How did they get so much land and so quickly? Well, besides being hunters, like I said, they were very adept militarily. So they created a military empire and conquered surrounding communities. And so what they would do is they would go in, they would conquer a place, and then the conquered peoples would have to pay tribute and were sometimes made slaves. They were also a theocracy, meaning that their government was based on the rule of their religious leaders. In fact, as if you remember, we just said that the location of their city was chosen because they believed that the eagle with a snake in its mouth was a sign from their god. So they were very much a theocratic society, and they would sacrifice their slaves and prisoners of war to their sun god. So I'm going to move on here to the next slide here. So you can see the Aztec Empire. It was very large. Here's the entirety of Central America, and they had principalities either here, which is where Lake Texcoco is, and the site of Tenochtitlan right here, but they also moved out very quickly. So you can see between the years of 1427 and 1444, they had this area just around Texcoco. But by 1502, which is only 80 years later, they had attained the areas throughout most of Central America. So they were very adept militarily. They extended their power through a combination of trade and then military conquest, as we said. And it did this not through the controlling of territories with large militaries, but they would conquer the peoples. They would take some as slaves or prisoners of war, depending on the type of warfare and whether or not the people gave up, as opposed to force the Aztecs to fight. And what they would do is they would instill city-state rulers that were friendly rulers, so to speak. So they would also construct this through marriage, similarly to how European monarchs did this as well. So they would create alliances between ruling dynasties and then extending an imperial ideology to its client states, meaning that they would extend this imperialist mentality throughout Central America. So you can see here, I mean, it's a very large part of Central America that the Aztecs were able to control and conquer. So when Europeans arrived in 1492, they were awed by what they saw. So, and by 1519, when Hernan Cortez led 550 Spanish soldiers to the capital city of Tenochtitlan as they set out to conquer the Aztec kingdom for themselves, they were very awed by what they saw, and they actually compared the advancement of the city to that of Rome. So they were very much awed by the splendor and the ability that they saw with the Aztecs. Of course, that did not keep them from conquering them. Now, here is a rendering of the Aztec calendar, or a Aztec calendar. And what's interesting about this is that the Aztec calendar is based off of the Mayan calendar, and they would have two cycles. The first cycle was the ritual cycle, and that was 260 days long. And then the civil cycle was 365 days, which, as you know, is what we use at present time. We use a 365-day calendar. Now, these cycles would sync once every 52 years. And when they would do that, they would celebrate it as a huge event called the Binding Up of Years. So following astrology was very important for most native cultures within Central America, and it was rather perfected by the Mayans and the Inca. Lastly, I'd like to look at just a biography of a woman. This woman's name is Malinche, and much of what we know about individual Native Americans comes from Europeans. That would be because Native cultures do not have a written language. What they would use would have been hieroglyphs, and the things that they would have noted would have been religious ceremonies or ideas about their gods, and also things like tax records and growing records. They wouldn't necessarily have written down their history like Europeans tend to have experience in doing. So we know much about Native Americans from what comes from Europeans. With that said, it's important to note that the conquered are the ones that are writing the histories of the conquered. So it's important to always be a little bit skeptical of any kind of information that a conqueror might write about the conquered. Anyway, so Malinche is one of such peoples that that we learn about Native Americans from. So in 1519, she was enslaved and living under harsh Aztec rule. So she would have been a native from one of the surrounding tribes. When the Spanish arrived in 1519, she gave them information about the Aztec culture. She also learned Spanish quickly and served as a translator for the Spanish, who called her Doña Marina. So Malinche helped build ties between the Spanish and the many unhappy Aztec subjects in the region. So this is just one way in which a woman is also a prominent figure in history, though she's not very well known. That would be the ending of my presentation for the Aztecs. I hope you enjoyed it, and coming up will be the questionnaire that I create for this.